Good evening to all. It's a pleasure to have you all at this presentation by Ümit Kurt of his ongoing research on Softas and Yaftas as part of the events organized by the Sagıp Sabancı Center at Columbia University. So, first of all, thank you to the center and to its director, Türküler Işıksel, and to the organizer behind this, Sümeyye Yar. It's a pleasure to have Ümit Kurt amongst us. I know Ümit, I've known him for quite a number of years now. And I'll give you a brief biographical introduction, giving you an idea of what he's been working on. So Ümit is a historian of the modern Middle East and very particularly of the social, cultural, and economic history of the late Ottoman Empire and the early Turkish Republic, with a special focus on the Armenian genocide and on the dispossession of Ottoman Armenians at large, as well as ethnic politics, forced migration, and infrastructural transformations during this transition from empire to republic. He completed his dissertation in history at Clark University in 2016. He has held postdoctoral positions at Harvard and at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute before teaching in the Armenian Studies program at California State University, Fresno. He's currently a fellow and lecturer, well, not exactly apparently, there's been a change there, but most recently he was a fellow and lecturer in history at the University of Newcastle, Australia. Following the spirit of the laws, the plunder of wealth in the Armenian genocide, which he co-authored with Taner Akçam in 2015, his book on the Armenians of Aintab, today's Gaziantep, was published in 2021, and he received several awards and recognition. His forthcoming book, Biographies of Violence, The Perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide, will be published next year by Cornell University Press. The French say that those absent are always wrong. So to avoid any such injustice and to remind you that this is a joint project, I would like to present the article's co-author, Owen Miller, who is also a historian and received his PhD in international and global history from Columbia University in 2015. And he had worked on Sassoon 1894, Mountains, Missionaries, and Massacres at the end of the Ottoman Empire. Owen Miller taught at Columbia, at Cornell, Pratt, Emerson, and Union colleges before joining the history department at Bilkent University, Ankara. His fields of research cover Ottoman-US relations, global histories of missionaries, constructions of race, mountain communities, and lowland-upland relations. He's currently working on a monograph on a US missionary family in Hawaii, the Ottoman Empire, and the American South. So, without further ado, I will invite Ümit Kurt to give his presentation, and then we can move on to questions, comments, questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you so much, Ekrem Hocam, for such a generous introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you, and I would like to also thank the organizer, whom Ekrem Hoca already mentioned, and also I'd like to thank Ahmet Tunç, my dear colleague and the professor of history here, for this kind invitation as well. And I want to pass my co-author and dear friends Owen Miller's greetings on to you as well for this occasion. So this is a new research, like a new baby for me. So I'm kind of shifting my subject matter from, collective violence, mass violence, and the dispossession of the Armenian movable and immovable properties to, again, the political opposition, let's say, in the late 19th century, especially under the reign of Abdülhamid II, to understand actually the socio-political structure and the fabric of the city of Istanbul, the capital of the empire in this century. So let me start with, so how am I gonna show my PowerPoint? I can use this, Sümeyye, I can use this.
You can use the keyboard.
Because I can't see the presentation on the screen.
The arrows, maybe? Oh.
Pardon. So sorry. Okay. Very good. All right. So on the morning of September 13, 1895, thousands of Armenians assembled in the courtyard of the Patriarchate in Kumkapı neighborhood of Istanbul. Observers noted that most were poor labor migrants from the distant eastern provinces of Bitlis and Van. Emotions ran high. The protest was organized, at least in part, by a socialist student organization called Hunchak, means bell. Two separate marches were planned. The first, composed of men, was to deliver a petition to the Grand Vizier calling for equal treatment under the law and justice for those murdered in the Sassun region in 1894. The other, composed of women, was to deliver parallel petition to Yıldız Palace, the residence of Abdülhamid II. After fiery speeches by Mari Beylerian, a young feminist member of the Hunchakian Party, the Social Democrat Hunchakian Party, founded in Geneva in 1887, the protesters headed toward the Sublime Porte, the bureaucratic seat of the Ottoman government. As they marched, many chanted Sassun and Sassun, in reference to a massacre in the mountains of the eastern provinces 1 year before, in which over 1,000 men, women and children had been killed by Ottoman soldiers. The violence at Sassun had been widely reported around the world, borne by telegraph, and had reignited international tensions over the plight of the Ottoman Christians, especially in the eastern provinces. For many in the crowd, who hailed from the river valleys surrounding the Sassun mountains, this was personal. Edwin Pierce, the veteran Istanbul-based correspondent for the liberal press organ, the Daily News, noted that many of the protesters include those, quote, who were simply frantic from the losses their relations have incurred and who were reckless of consequences, unquote. Despite the censorship and the strict control of the post, many of the protesters had received letters from back home, and for the receivers of such letters and their fellow villagers, the Armenian question is not one of the foreign politics. It is one regarding the imprisonment of Bedros, the theft of Artin's cattle, the attack upon a father, brother, or sister. Before they reached their destination, the crowd was halted by rows of heavily armed police. The captain of the police ordered the protesters to disperse. When they refused, the police attacked, wielding whips, swords, and bayonets. One of the Armenians pulled out a weapon and shot the captain of the police, and killing him. Crowds of men dressed as religious students then attacked the Armenians. Some Armenians were dragged off to the prison adjoining the Baba Ali to be killed immediately or tortured to death. Witnesses described the next 3 days a maelstrom of organized state violence as hundreds of predominantly working-class Armenians, Bantus in Armenian, mostly single men, living in the crowded khans, were systematically beaten to death by men dressed in the robes of religious students. The news, once again, borne by telegraphs, crisscrossing the world, described these massacres in gruesome detail. Quote, the Softas chased and attacked with bludgeons every Armenian they met in the streets of Istanbul quarter of the city, killing 50 of them during the night, unquote. But within a few days, many observers and witnesses began to ask a critical question about the identity of the men dressed as religious students. Were these Softa? Or were some of them police officers so dressed? Why would police dress up as Softa to kill Armenians? To answer this question, I and Owen Miller examined the Softa, who the Softa were, and how they fit into the socio-economic and political fabric of the city over the course of 7 decades from 1826 and 1896. This research makes 3 contributions to the Ottoman history and to our understanding of sectarian politics in the Middle East. First, it restored religious students to the center of the political life of the late 19th century. Second, we seek to dispel the image of the Softa as adhering to a conservative political tendencies and being supportive of the state, and instead show how their politics ran the gamut from liberal-egalitarian to reactionary hierarchical. The Softa were often part of the broader political movements, sometimes connecting civilians with the military, socialists and conservatives, Christians and Muslims, monarchists and constitutionalists. Understanding the diversity of Softa and the threat some of them pose to government will elucidate the politics of opposition and protest, as well as the dynamics of repression in the late Ottoman Empire. Finally, by returning to Softa to the center of Ottoman politics, the history of the Ottoman state violence against Armenians might be re-evaluated. The Hamidian government sought to use the Armenian issue to divide egalitarian-inclined Muslims from their hierarchical counterparts, pitting some Softa against others. This politics of distraction was a key feature, often overlooked, in the history of the Hamidian massacres that led to the deaths of tens of thousands in the aftermath of the protest of Baba Ali in September 1895. During the long reign of the Abdülhamid II, the pivotal role of the Softa in dethroning the Sultan and ushering in the first constitution was widely and readily acknowledged by both Ottoman and European observers. Yet, over the ensuing decades, with some notable exceptions, the history of the Softa was almost totally eclipsed by hagiographical accounts of great men, such as Cevdet Pasha and Midhat Pasha. In standard Ottoman survey texts, the Softas, where they appear at all, are nearly incidental. Over the past decade and a half, a number of scholars have delved into the links between Armenian organizations and Muslims within the Ottoman Empire. And yet, the critical links between the Softas and the Armenian students, as well as the connections between Softas and the students at the medical school, Imperial School of Medical Science, Tıbbiye-i Şahane, have remained understudied. This limited reporting is due in part to fragmentation of scholarship. Some scholars study history of Muslim students connected to Ottoman state schools, especially the Imperial Medical School, but also education structures for bureaucrats and military officers, Mektebi Mülkiye. Certain researchers focus on the history of Armenian radicals, some abroad and some within the Ottoman Empire. Another group of historians probes the history of the Softa. Owing to this academic segmentation, we know very little about the interactions between students across these groups. It appears, for instance, that students who founded the Committee of Ottoman Union, later the Committee for Union and Progress, were classmates of those who organized the first Ottoman branch of the Hunchak. In other words, it's likely that members of the Hunchak and the Committee of Ottoman Union knew each other. Did they collaborate against Sultan Abdülhamid II then? One important set of sources that has not been systematically employed by researchers to trace how the history of the Softa overlaps with other student communities in the 19th century consists in the writings of Istanbul-based correspondents reporting for European and American newspapers. Many of the correspondents were either long-term residents or born in the Ottoman Empire and spoke the local languages without any accent. As with all sources, the accounts of journalists differ widely in quality and accuracy. Broadly, there are three varieties of correspondent reporting that may be distinguished. The first included first-hand writing reporting from correspondents in the Ottoman Empire. We know the names and identities of several correspondents, such as Edwin Pierce of the Daily News, John Drew Gay of the Daily Telegraph, and Henry Otis Dwight, the Istanbul-born missionary and journalist of the New York Tribune. Some of them, like Dwight, were actually locals, born and bred in the city that they reported in. Others, like Pierce, were decade-long residents who spoke and read Turkish fluently. Many interviewed Softa and reflected their ideas in their articles. The second set of newspaper sources are more distant and probably are telegraph accounts from sources within the empire. It's difficult to trace exactly where these sources came from. Some, no doubt, were based on rumors that proved to be unfounded. There was often a huge gulf between accounts of correspondence based in Istanbul and those articles based on untraceable chain of correspondence and produced by editors from afar. The third type were correspondents from the Ottoman Empire who were writing in dissident newspapers published abroad. In some ways, these sources combine the specificity of authorship of the first with the distance and vagueness of the second. Owing to censorship, many Ottoman newspapers were not able to report the protests of students against the Ottoman state. These students instead made their way into European press, sometimes as interviews, from time to time observation of protests, and occasionally based on the recording of Yafta or placards that documented public opinion. Many of these pamphlets were written by students. They sometimes reflect the liberal views that stress equality under the law, and sporadically they represented the view that some inhabitants of the Ottoman Empire should rule over others. It's worth stressing the linkage between the protests of Ottoman students and the intensification of Ottoman censorship. Pre-publication censorship in Ottoman Empire can be observed in May of 1876 when the Softas protested against the regime of Abdülaziz. The more draconian censorship of the later Sultan Abdülhamid II emerged in the effort to silence student supporters of Ottoman democracy in 1877. To understand why Abdülhamid feared the Softa and how and why secret police infiltrated their ranks and how violence against Armenians in Istanbul was employed to divide Ottoman supporters of democracy, one might begin in 1826 with the overthrow of the Janissaries. On the morning of June 15, 1876, in what has come down in Ottoman history as the Vakaya Hayriye, auspicious event, Sultan Mahmud II crushed the Janissary corps in Istanbul. He was able to accomplish this grisly task with the enthusiastic aid of the thousands of armed Softa. For the next century, until the advent of the Turkish Republic in 1923, the Softa play a key role in the political life of the city and thus the empire more broadly. Joseph Sizlovich pointedly noted, quote, "Riots by medrese students appear to have been a common occurrence in Constantinople, and in the second half of the 19th century, uprising took place in 1853, 59, and 76, unquote. By the late 1870s, the Softa were considered, according to bureaucratic memorialist Mahmud Celaleddin, an oppositional society, Cemiyeti Muhalife. The term Softa derived from Persian and meant one who is burned with the love of knowledge. Many Softa entered the medrese with the hope of a bureaucratic, legal, or scholarly career as members of the religious scholars. Others may have encouraged to join the ranks of medrese students as a means to avoid military services. In the fall of 1853, the Softa play a crucial role in the lead-up to the Crimean War. As Candan Badem has pointed out, the intensity of public fervor was indicated by placards, almost assuredly written by the ulema and Softa, which were plastered on the walls of the mosque, calling for the defense of their clear rights against Tsarist Russia. This use of Yaftas would be a tactic employed continuously for the last 7 decades of the empire. Lord Stratford the Redcliffe, the British ambassador, was convinced that the Softa had very nearly overturned the government. The Softa and their teachers may also have been implicated in the Society of the Self-Sacrifice conspiracy of 1859 to topple the Ottoman government, Fedailer Cemiyeti. According to Florian Riedler, the Fedailer Cemiyeti was the first example of an opposition group confronting the Ottoman Empire in the Tanzimat era, unquote. Much of the reporting in the Istanbul local newspapers was censored. Riedler made use of the London Times to indicate that ulema and theological students were implicated in a plot to overthrow Abdülmecid and to install his brother Abdülaziz on the Ottoman throne. The British drugman Pisani also reported the real object of the conspirators, as confessed by some of the prisoners, was to get rid of Sultan Abdülmecid by violent means and to replace him by his brother Abdülaziz. As the Grand Vizier Ali Pasha noted in a private conversation with Pisani, the conspirators were perturbed not only by the Sultan's apparent disregard for the Quranic law, but the enormous expenditures incurred by the state on the personal household of the Sultan, while payment of Ottoman soldiers' salaries remained in arrears. As Riedler's close investigation of interrogation records, istiknameler, revealed that the Fedailer Cemiyeti was structured somewhat like a Sufi lodge, and the intention of the conspirators, which included Softa, was to remove Abdülmecid from power. However, it was in 1876 that Softa politics took the upper hand. Having helped Mahmud II overturn Janissary power nearly 50 years before, the Softa now led a rebellion against his son Abdülaziz. On May 11, 1876, thousands of them gathered in mosque, and according to a contemporary observer, drew up a program by which they resolved to demand of the Sultan the instant dismissal of the Grand Vizier, Shaykhul Islam, Serasker, and a constitution. On 15 of May, the Times reported the Softas heading the populace and parading the streets crying, "Down with the Grand Vizier." Other demands ranged from military occupation of the semi-autonomous mountains region of Montenegro, a representative council to be composed of Christians and Muslim members from the provinces and the capital, and for the control of public affairs, freedom of the press, and the dismissal of the Russian ambassador Ignatiev, and the placards denouncing the Grand Vizier Mahmud Nedim Pasha and the Şeyhülislam Hasan Fehmi Efendi lined the streets. The students turned their writing desks upside down, along with their teachers and other members of the ulama, marched to the Sublime Porte. Especially after the articles penned by Namık Kemal in İbret that were allegedly instigating public opinion against Mahmud Nedim Pasha, the Grand Vizier, began to use preemptive censorship to stop the agitations of public opinion. However, Western newspapers followed political events closely and more freely. The Palmal Gazette, on 26th of May, informed its readers that many of the students carried weapons. According to Mahmud Celaleddin Pasha, the Softa came from Fatih, Bayazıt, and Süleymaniye mosque complexes. Their medreses were at the pinnacle of the Ottoman system of Islamic education. Although contemporary sources do not give any names of Softa who participated in the massive protest, Selma Özülkü, a poor but very talented master student, very few, perhaps the only thesis written on the Softa in Turkey, discovered that prominent members of the ulama, such as Ahmet Hulusi Efendi and the Gürcü Şerif Efendi, had participated in the protest. According to Özülkü, Ahmet Hulusi Efendi was a member of the Young Ottoman Society and had enrolled over 1,700 Softa in the secret organization within the course of a year. Other eminent group of the ulama would later lend their support to constitutionalism, most notably Kazasker İsmail Seyfettin Efendi and Şakir Efendi. Many of the Softa had received letters telling of murdered family members back in Rumelia in the recent Bulgarian uprising, but unlike the Armenian migrant laborers protesting in a parallel fashion, 19 years later in 1895, the thousands of Muslim students in 1876 were not attacked by the Ottoman police. Rather, some factions of the police who also opposed the government supported them. The goals of the students were, as Edwin Pierce, the correspondent for the Daily News, put it, political and not religious or fanatical. In addition to restricting the civil list budget and limiting the Sultan to a fixed salary, the Softa advocated political checks on Sultani power. Adopting the program of the New Turkey Party, they demanded the establishment of a representative national council according to the interpretation of Quranic law. In a striking dispatch from late May, Edwin Pierce wrote, quote, "In short, what they want is a council and a constitution," unquote. Sultan Abdülaziz, faced with massive protests led by well-organized Softa, conceded to their demands, removing both the Grand Vizier and the deeply unpopular Mahmud Nedim Pasha, and perhaps more critically, Hasan Fehmi, the Şeyhülislam, Hasan Fehmi Efendi. The British ambassador, Henry Elliot, recalled that by the end of May 1876, that, quote, "the word constitution was in every mouth." that the Softas, representing the intelligent public opinion of the capital, knowing themselves to be supported by the bulk of nation, Christian as well as Muslim, would not, I believe, relax their efforts till they obtain it. And that, should the Sultan refuse to grant it, an attempt to depose him appeared almost inevitable. That texts from Quran were circulated, proving to faithful that the form of government sanctioned by it was properly democratic, and the absolute authority wielded by the sovereign was an usurpation of the rights of the people and not sanctioned by the holy law. And both text and the precedents were appealed to show that allegiance was not due a sovereign who neglected the interest of the state, unquote. Moreover, the dissatisfaction with the status quo expressed by students has spread through every class, and from the pashas down to the porters in the streets and the boatmen on the Bosphorus, and no one thought any longer of concealing his opinions. Over the course of escalating protests and eventual involvement of the military, Sultan Abdulaziz himself was replaced by his nephew Murad V on May 13, 1876. Reactions to Softa-led ihtilal, let's say, revolution, varied. The initial attempt of the state dignitary was to censor the news of the Softa movement, a tendency which would become part of a larger pattern. On May 12, 1876, the day after the Softa called for constitutional government, a censorship decree was issued by Sultan Abdulaziz. The editors of the Basiret newspaper left a 4-page blank. They apologetically noted, "We regret to announce to our readers that we will not be able to publish our newspaper for a few days because our printing press is broken." The Sabah newspaper, printed on the same day, also contained columns devoid of text. According to Cevdet Kudret, a literary historian, on the day the censorship decree was issued, the students tried to raid the port and Mahmud Nedim Pasha took refuge in the Iranian embassy. He was dismissed the same day and Mütercim Rüştü Pasha became the Grand Vizier. One of Mütercim Rüştü Pasha's first act was to repeal the censorship decree. Journalists based in Istanbul, but working for newspapers printed abroad, wrote about the toppling of the Sultan's government by religious students as one unparalleled in the history of the Ottoman Empire. In the words of Murat Şiviloğlu, the mobilization of Softa, quote, especially attracted their attention. They were called priestly Janissaries, an association of which Softas were also conscious and which they probably enjoyed, unquote. According to Pierce, there may be an echo of the French influence in the proclamation of the new Sultan by the will of the nation, but the dethronement of the late monarch by the Softas is without a parallel in the history of Istanbul. While they were unified in overturning Sultan Abdulaziz, Dwight also perceptibly noted that the Softa and the ulema were divided among themselves over who was to be included in the desired Ottoman parliament. Some Softas advocated a union of discordant races in one by the introduction of political equality, and they have even dug out texts from Quran to favor their view. Other Softa, however, argued that the Quran is opposed to political equality between the true believers and those whose sword has spared. As subsequent events show, at least at first, the liberal-egalitarian, which we call term and call like this, won this debate, and a parliament with Christians and Muslims was brought into existence in 1877. The influence of the Softa was not based on their numbers alone. Antonio Galenga, the correspondent for the Times, estimated that in 1877 there were, at the most moderate computation, of 20,000 Softa in Istanbul. Selma Özülkü estimated that there were between 3,000 and 6,000 medrese students in Istanbul in late 1870s. The British ambassador Henry Elliot suggested that the range of Softa could be as low as 5,000 and as high as 60,000. According to US Minister Maynard, the large numbers may have included many of the ulema. It may also have included medrese students enrolled in educational institutions not officially linked to the state who were unofficial Softa, let's say. Many of the officers in the Ottoman military were themselves former Softas, as were members of the state bureaucracy. Medrese state trained officers included newly appointed Minister of War, Serasker Hüseyin Avni Pasha, the Director of Military Schools, Süleyman Hüsnü Pasha, for instance. While these two played roles in overturning Sultan Abdülaziz, Midhat Pasha, one of the progenitors of the Ottoman Constitution of 1876, was the favorite candidate of the Medrese students. It was noted that while the first object of the Softa revolt was to depose the late Sultan, the second was to make Midhat Pasha Grand Vizier. The Softa would eventually get their wish, but in a dramatic and unexpected fashion. Events moved quickly. Within days, the former Sultan Abdülaziz was dead. He was discovered in a pool of his own blood, a pair of scissors in hand. His successor Murad V, perhaps aggravated by his sudden accession to the throne or by the sanguinary death of his uncle, grew increasingly unbalanced. The Softa organized once more, now insisting that the crown should pass to his younger brother, the 30-year-old Abdülhamid II. When Abdülhamid II ascended to the throne in the late summer of 1876, it must have been clear to all observers that the Softa were to be a force to be reckoned with within the Ottoman Empire. They play a critical role in the transmission of the dissident political ideas to the provinces. Softa were in close contact with both students and the public, people of all age and different walks of life, and had the capacity to influence and direct them more owing to their social religious status. On May 24, 1877, a month into the disastrous 1877-78 war with Russia, an estimated 2,000 Softa mobilized again and threatened to dethrone Abdülhamid II this time, possibly owing to unexpected fall of the fortress city of Ardahan to Russian forces. Additionally, some Softa bitterly resented the exile of Midhat Pasha, whom they regarded as their special champion. As one writer noted at the time, the Softa have become a distinct political force. After visiting the parliament, some of the Softa marched to the palace. Abdülhamid II took refuge in one of his fortresses, and rumors swirled that he was considering abdicating in favor of Yusuf İzzettin, the young son of Abdülaziz, favored by some Softa. Other Softa demonstrated against Redif Pasha, the Minister of War, blamed for the lackluster performance of the Ottoman military. Redif Pasha warned the Sultan that if he were to be removed, the Sultan would not be safe for a day. Many of the Softa were joined by large crowds who shouted, "Down with the government, long live Midhat Pasha." This whole affair, according to one account, supposedly by a person of rank in the Ottoman Empire, terrified Abdülhamid II. The Sultan now moved against the Softa, declaring martial law, forbidding any civilians from bearing arms or publicly assembling in the streets, and allowing police to make impromptu searches for the homes of suspects. Anyone deemed suspicious could be banished without a trial. Abdülhamid took the opportunity to exile many of Midhat Pasha's young Ottoman constitutionalist allies, including Namık Kemal and the journalist and editor Agah Efendi. According to several sources, including Midhat Pasha's memoirs, Agah Efendi had participated in the Softa demonstration in May 1876. The arrests and deportations of Softa began in earnest. The law of the state of siege in turn specifically noted that newspapers which attempt unduly excite the public mind will be suppressed. All gatherings and public meetings are forbidden. Nafi al-Jabiri, a representative from Aleppo and the scion of an important family of ulama, publicly condemned the state of siege and the exile of the Softa in the newly opened Ottoman parliament. When Abdülhamid II, using the war as a pretext, prorogued the parliament in February 1878, oppositional parliamentarians like al-Jabiri were exiled as well. By the end of 1878, the Sultan appeared to have broken with both the constitutional movement and the Softa's ability to protest. So over the course of next decade, Abdülhamid II consolidated his power through exile, imprisonment, and even murder of his political opponents. When the Softa protested his rule, he turned to the military. In 1882, large numbers of Softa marched into a mosque during Friday prayers, cursing the name of the Sultan and mistreating those religious scholars who refused to exclude the name of Abdülhamid II from their prayers. The mosque was quickly surrounded by soldiers and hundreds of the Softa were arrested. An observer wrote that the neighborhoods were inhabited by the Softas and were occupied militarily. Abdülhamid II kept both the office of the Şeyhül İslam, the Meşihat Dairesi, and the Softa under close surveillance. As Kemal Karpat pointed out, the Sultan mistrusted Softas, whom the dissident ulema and the constitutionalists could mobilize against the rulers as they did against Abdülaziz. The next manifestation of the Softa organization and opposition took place in 1889, as the Armenian issue came to the fore of international politics. In December 1889, a correspondent for the Prester Lloyd newspaper alleged that high-ranking members of the Ottoman government, including Grand Vizier Mehmet Kamil Pasha, had convened meetings with the Softa at the house of one Ömer Hilmi Efendi and was to furiously criticize the regime of Abdülhamid II. Despite Kamil Pasha's insistence that this was simply in the writings of malicious outsiders, an investigation was launched as a precautionary measure. As the reporting of attempts reveals, the anxieties of the Hamidian government revolve around a union of restive students and the dissident members of the upper echelons of the bureaucracy, the same combination that overthrown Abdülaziz. Within a year, placards would once again be plastered to the walls of mosques calling for the dethronement of the Abdülhamid II. In 1890, shortly after a massive protest of Armenians, a manifesto largely circulated among the Softa classes, fully approving of the Armenian demonstration of the July 15 and asking all honest Muslims to rise and demolish the present corrupt administration, which is allowed to prey on all classes of people. Quoting directly from the manifesto, the Armenian movement was not directed against Islam, but against the present tyrannical officials which are sapping the foundations of the state. Let us therefore unite with Armenians against our common enemy and regenerate our resolute and ruined country. Unquote. Throughout the first 2 decades of his rule, Abdülhamid II had periodically employed the time-honored strategy of exile to limit dissent to his rule. In the fall of 1892, hundreds of Softa were peremptorily exiled, some to Anatolia and others, at least according to rumor, to the distant Hijaz. The Istanbul press, muzzled by state censorship, and was not allowed to discuss this dramatic order. Weeks after the Softa had been exiled, in early January 1893, hectograph printed placards written in Ottoman Turkish appeared simultaneously across central Anatolia. They were posted on the sides of churches, mosques, public buildings and police stations in the provinces of Sivas and Ankara. A well-informed Istanbul-based correspondent for the British Liberal Weekly, The Speaker, noted as the posting had apparently been done in one night. Quote, there must have been a large number of persons concerned with the plot, unquote. One pamphlet, dutifully translated and sent to the British ambassador, went as follows. Osmanlılar, the last days have approached of Abdülhamid, the tyrant, who has soiled the sacred throne of Osman and rendered the religion of Islam detestable. To the heavens have risen the crisis of vengeance of the blood spoiled by that tyrant in destroying and overthrowing our beloved fatherland, in order that he should be maintained on the throne which he has illegally usurped. A great power which rules over millions of Muslims is coming to your assistance. Be of courage. Unquote. The placards' underlying language and content bore a resemblance to that of the young Ottomans, the critics of Sultan Abdülaziz, as well as the followers of Midhat Pasha. However, the final line of the placard is a bit mysterious, were the author suggesting that British support might topple the Abdülhamid II regime and lend itself to a more just and equitable outcome. There is evidence to suggest that some of the Softa who were in exile in the fall of 1892 were working with Hunchak, the Armenian socialist student group. A version of the Yafta was published in Hunchak newspaper at the end of September 1892, several months before the printed proclamations were widely distributed across central Anatolia. The editorial board of the Hunchak newspaper claimed that the pamphlets of the Turkish origin were disseminated in large numbers across Mediterranean cities from Smyrna to Syria. Ottoman state bureaucrats declared that the placards had been published, distributed and affixed by members of and sympathizers to the Hunchakian party as part of a general campaign to rouse Muslim public opinion against the state and set the basis for British intervention. So, were the sympathizers Muslim religious students? Many of the Hunchak members, arrested and in some cases tortured, continually claimed that the Yaftas had been composed and distributed by Muslims. A certain Rushtuni, a Hunchak sympathizer, accused of putting up pamphlets, adamantly insists that while the Hunchaks had been involved, the original authors of the placards were members of secret Muslim oppositional group connected with the Young Turks who had sought the assistance of Hunchak Central Committee. Although it's very likely that some Hunchakian activists were involved in distributing the posters, it's also highly plausible that placards themselves had been composed by Muslims. If Muslims had been involved in the Yafta affair, why did not the state arrest them? Consul Logworth, considering the evidence in Trabzon, observed not only that there was a latent spirit of discontent among Muslims, but also that the revolutionary faction in the capital has doubtless feelers in the provinces. The palace was probably very aware of this. Longworth drew up another theory. There were two revolutionary societies, the Muslim and non-Muslim, the apparently passive and the apparently active. It was found perhaps not only easier, but safer to crush with unwarranted cruelty, and as a warning to the other, the one least likely to weaken the caliphate by causing a stir in the Muslim world, in the Muslim world. To punish the potato authors of the seditious placards, the state brutally harassed, incarcerated, and tortured large number of Armenians, partly with an objective to sow terror, to deter further fraternization with or participation in revolutionary committees. After a heavily publicized trial in Ankara, 65 Armenians were accused of sedition for distributing the pamphlets. Most of the defendants said that they had been forced to confess under torture. 14 of the defendants were acquitted, 5 condemned to death, and the rest sentenced to 7 to 15 years in prison. So despite the hundreds of arrests, the torture, the imprisonment and the executions of Armenians accused of sedition, manifold pamphlets continued to appear across the empire. Alongside placards accusing Abdülhamid II of being the tyrant, usurper, were others that appealed to Muslims to go in great numbers to Mecca for a grand consultation on the interest of Islam. So by December 1893, Yaftas were even put up on the external walls of the Fatih Mosque in Istanbul. Abdülhamid was apparently extremely irritated and decreed that the Softas, whose numbers has continued to swell, be temporarily removed from the capital. This time, perhaps to soften the blow, the Sultan ordered that this be simply a short 3-month exile and that all their expenses be paid from his own pocket. So, how much time do I have? 10 minutes maybe? More, less
nice,
than 10?
yeah.
Yes.
No, that would be,
Okay,
10 minutes would be great.
Okay. So, from the earliest reporting, however, some correspondents were doubtful about the role of the Softas. So, throughout his reporting for the Daily News, Edwin Pierce chose his words carefully. He wrote that the massacre in Sassoon and the other massacres in eastern provinces, committed by men who were dressed as Softa, or Softas, or persons disguised as such. Over the subsequent weeks, this allegation was echoed by correspondents in the Daily News and the Graphic. Another account from an official source stressed that police attempt to calm down Softa, some of whom then asked the police, "Siz de mi Ermenilerle beraber oldunuz? Are you with the Armenians?" Assuming that these accounts were based on independent observation, it's remarkable that so many very different observers would suggest that the perpetrators of the massacres may have included police in the garb of religious students. In any case, many observers of this violence at the end of September and the beginning of October 1895 suggested that Hamidian government condoned, if not actively organized the massacre. So there is enough evidence to suggest that the Softa, or those dressed like them, were indeed armed by Ottoman authorities and incited the violence. It seems possible that police dressed as Softa play a role in the subsequent violence directed at the Armenian labor migrant over the next 2 days. But this violence was relatively localized. Witnesses observed cordons of police preventing a group of people with the Softa appearance from crossing into areas with large numbers of European inhabitants of Istanbul, whose injury or death could trigger an even larger crisis. In an interview, October 2nd, Walter Blunt Pasha, a British military officer in the employ of the Ottomans, hinted another aspect of the story. According to him, the government is afraid now the Softas who took part in the riot against the Armenians will continue it against the government. Ascertaining what the Softa wanted is really difficult. Although most observers at the time spoke of them as if they shared a common set of beliefs, it's more likely that their politics were diverse. As Ismail Kara put it, it should be remembered that the ulama, as a class, did not form a homogeneous but a fragmented body, members of which are defending somewhat contradictory theses. We have evidence, however, from placards that over the next few months blanket the city. Were some of these pamphlets and circulars penned by Softa, perhaps reflecting different points of view within their ranks? In the case of the October 9th placards, we at least have a purported set of Muslim authors. Shortly after they were discovered, a certain İzzet Efendi was arrested and taken to the prison near Yıldız Palace. So, meanwhile, the British embassy was tracking the growing tensions in the city closely. The British believed that Muslims, possibly Softa, were considering collaborative action with the Hunchaks shortly after the Baba Ali protest and the subsequent massacre in Istanbul. In a telegraph to the Marquess Salisbury, Philip Curry, the British ambassador, wrote, "I hear from a reliable source that the proofs have come into hands of the authorities that the Muslim agitators contemplate joint action against the palace with the Armenian Hunchak society, with whom they are in communication." So, I would like to conclude. Let's skip this part. So, it's kind of remarkable that in Ottoman era dictionaries, you know, the term Softa simply meant a student at the medrese or perhaps a particular rank of such a student. And by the early republic, the term had increasingly gained the pejorative meaning of reactionary, bigot, or fanatic. How exactly this transformation in meaning took place is a huge subject and one on which this research has endeavored to shed light. There is much evidence that in the decades after the overturning of the Janissaries, the Softa challenged power structures. Looking back from the early 20th century, one of the last Sheikhul Islam, Mustafa Sabri Efendi, wrote that for 30 or 40 years, turban wearers have been recognized in the eyes of the government as Midhat Pasha's followers, unquote. Moreover, Mustafa Sabri stressed that during the reign of Abdülhamid II, the government had a secret hostility toward the ulama. Halil also agreed that. He observed that the Sultan, whose marvelous power and success in crushing everything that might endanger his despotic personal rule is undeniable, has paralyzed and the collective influence of the Softas so that they can no longer be political tools of any power that may rise to oppose him. At least in early 1876, some Softa supported Midhat Pasha against the authoritarian rule of Sultan Abdulaziz and promoted the larger goal of Ottomanism to ensure equality for all citizens of the empire, non-Muslims and Muslims alike. Both contemporary and more recent accounts of the Softa often refer to them as though they had held a single political view. Uriel Hayt, David Kushner, and Amit Bey have all argued that the ulama were divided between reformists and conservatives. Tensions between the conservative and liberal Muslims are well attested in a massive literature on Islamic modernism, as well as in the work of Ismail Kara. Our use of the term liberal-egalitarian highlights that Muslims like Midhat Pasha and Seyfettin Efendi were committed to Ottomanism, the premise that all should be treated equally under the law, accorded representation in the parliament. Given the overwhelming evidence that the ulama were divided among themselves, why would the Softa be a monolithic? It appears that some Softa were more reactionary and sought hierarchy, while others were more liberally inclined and desired equality. Some seem to think that the Quran allowed them to put the supposedly rebellious Armenians in their place, while others thought that the violence against Armenians contravened the Quran. As Armenians were slaughtered in the provinces and foreign intervention appeared more likely, Muslim resistance to Abdülhamid II regime increased. To fend off these challenges, the Sultan not only divided non-Muslims from Muslims, but also carried out policies that alienated egalitarian Muslims from their more reactionary co-religions. Much of the existing scholarship on the massacres had focused almost exclusively on the dynamics of Muslims versus Christians, thereby ignoring the tension between liberal Muslims and their more conservative counterparts. Could efforts to target liberal Muslims have contributed to the violence of the Hamidian massacres? The first public proclamation of the CUP was a response to the violence against the Armenian protesters in the fall of 1895. During the subsequent year, dozens of pogroms targeted Armenian civilians from Istanbul to Van, from Trabzon to Zeytun. Is it conceivable that? I don't have my last pages, sorry about that. Here. Is it conceivable that the violence contributed to the growth of the CUP as it transformed from a student group into a secret political party? Scholars have long observed that much of the generation that founded the Turkish Republic emerged from the ranks of the CUP. Within a year of its creation, the Turkish Republic, as you know, closed down the medreses that had trained the Softa. While the closure of the medreses is usually read as a sign of the secularization of society, could it be that this act was intended to remove the institutional structures of potential political opponents? The founders of the Republic laid exclusive claim to the reformist political program, defended by a broad coalition opposing Abdülhamid II. The earliest generation of historians in the Republic proceeded to write both the Softa and violence against Armenians out of the story of the genesis of modern Turkey. The omission of the Softa as central actors in the history of the Ottoman Empire remains obscure to this day. Thank you so much for your patience.
If I'm not mistaken, the ritual is that we sit here and pretend to have a conversation and take questions from the public. Right? Okay. Thank you so much, Hamid. Let me start the conversation by saying that it's a very interesting article. It's a very rich and dense article. Okay, I have some points I would like to develop. One is, I think it's weird that the only word you use to describe these guys is Softa, when the word that was used in contemporary sources was talebe-i ulum. I think it makes a big difference, because Softa is not just the word that the Republic will use in a derogatory way, but it's also a very Orientalist way. I mean, it is what all these Western observers are using to describe these turbaned guys. And I'm not sure I share the confidence, the trust you put in the observations of these journalists. I think they are products of the time, and that they are naturally kind of, Orientalist, that they have an agenda. I've even found a document by the French, a French diplomatic document, that says that the British are manipulating the Softas to terrify Abdülhamid during the Urabi crisis in Egypt, and that they're using the Softas as a threat to intimidate him and to give him the impression that the entire Muslim world is going to turn against him if he continues defending Urabi. So I think there's a lot there that is, and I think there is a direct consequence of this use of Softa and not Talibi Ulum. And my new toy is Mutafarrika. So I went for the period that you studied. There are 11 instances of Softa in Ottoman Turkish publications against 186 Talibi Ulum. Right? So it's really not the word used. It might even be already in Ottoman parlance some kind of a synonym of sarıklı turbans, that is a condescending or critical term. So I think that is problematic. I think also it is problematic that you haven't attempted to use Ottoman sources.
Exactly.
The press, I agree with you. I mean, there's no hope. The press under Hamid is hopeless. There's nothing there. Or there's going to be things there are things earlier. There's a beautiful declaration by the Talibi Ulum to their Christian brethren in 1876, when they enroll in the army and whatever, you know the story. But otherwise, but the archives are not that disappointing.
Okay.
There's plenty of stuff. I mean, I've counted, I'm obsessive compulsive, I suppose. I've counted, you've used 4 Ottoman documents, 2 of which are basically transcriptions of Western newspapers. And I went into the archives, not in a very systematic way, but I mean, there are fascinating reports by the Şeyhülislamate about trying to control what the Talibi Ulum is, constantly saying some are Talibi Ulum, others are just sarıklı. So, and sometimes, even in Nazım Pasha's famous compilation of documents, admitting that the Talibi Ulum or that the sarıklız are attacking, harassing the Armenians. So there's a lot there to unpack. So I think that one objection I would have is that you are giving us one side of the story.
Yes.
And that I think it would be interesting to dig into Ottoman sources to see to what extent Ottoman sources can give you not necessarily a parallel or an alternative to this, but just look at it because it's interesting. I think because otherwise you are looking at something very complicated. You're looking at the most complicated Venn diagram, right? Of liberals, revolutionaries, Armenians, Softas, Talibi Ulum. It's so unclear. And at the end of the day, at the end of the paper, there's no answer. Which is good. I mean, I always say that a good question is better than a lame answer or a predictable answer. So there's no answer, but it means that it's very complicated. And the other objection I would add is that there's the 1876-77, and especially the fact the enrollment of the what do you call them, Talibi Ulum, as başıbozuk or as volunteers. There's a lot there in the press because it's still Midhat's times.
Yes.
And that gives you a possibility of finding a voice, because what is missing is the Softas, or the Talibi Ulum, their voice. You have Kalenga, you have peers talking about them, for them. We don't hear them, and it's probable that we will never hear them directly, but I think there are indirect traces that can be unearthed from the archival and even the press, the archival documentation and even the press, if you include the period of 1876-77 beyond just, you know, an episode, dig into the sources. So that's, yeah, pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really grateful, and I accept all your objections, by the way. So I have actually Erdem Hoca was the very first one to read our piece in several drafts and give really generous feedback. So your first critique was one of them, you know, feedback. So still, we actually did search different words as you have suggested in our email correspondences, like maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, and probably I think it's also related to your second critique. We kind of we may have approached it from this episodal kind of perspective rather than taking it or seeing it from a vantage point of long durée. So that's why I think we definitely dig into archives, you know, more, and between especially 1876 and 77, the whole year. And I think indirect traces of Talebe-i-Ulum and their activities is key here. So we could definitely pay attention. So yeah, and also we kind of only have one active voice from Halil Halit. So his interrogation, this transcription from his memoirs, from the book, I mean.
Yeah.
So, and it was a bit, I mean, it doesn't make you feel right while you're reading it, you know, the accuracy and the verification of the transcription of the interview or his response to the investigations. But that is the only source at hand, let's say, as a Softa.
But is he a Softa? I mean, the question is,
yes,
is everybody who went at some point, you know, once a Softa, always a Softa? You called Midhat Pasha.
They called Midhat, yes, I was going to make the same point.
So, you know, it's kind of easy. It's a blanket statement.
But,
if you've been to a madrasa, you're a Softa. It's very Kemalist.
Yes.
In a sense.
Yeah.
And Halil Halit, what's interesting with Halil Halit is that his Diary of a Turk, which my students know very well because I'm assigning it this semester, is published in English in London for a British public.
Yes.
And it's, in that sense, it's already problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it, and he's the one, you say here, that he calls Ali Suavi's followers in 1878 Softas, when history has it generally that they're Muhajirs. So I think that also has to do with this amalgamation of the rabble, basically, of the streets, those who wear a turban, those who are uncouth, those who are, you know, there's a very interesting semantic thing there that needs to be explored.
Yes,
and
distinguished.
And what's his name, Halil Halit, in '95, in August of 1995, publishes in the Pall Mall Gazette a letter to Gladstone, where he rejects all the accusations of violence perpetrated against the Armenians. And of course he criticizes Hamid, but he still stands up for his country and defends. So the idea that the Softas or the Talebe-i-Ulum are egalitarian, I don't buy it, really. I don't think, because even the young Ottomans, people like Ziya Pasha, Nam Kemal, in the 60s, when they talk of equality, they generally say, and there's a very good article in Hürriyet called Mesele-i Musavat, and they say basically, what equality, because it's after 1856, the Reform Edict, what equality? The Sharia already gives whatever they deserve in terms of equality to the non-Muslims. So their equality is really a very hierarchical equality, condescending. It's, you know, as it still is in Turkey today, where toleration is supposed to be a virtue, because you are big brother and the others you will tolerate as long as they do not get in the way of what you consider your mission in life. That's, I think, so I don't think they're really, you know, and when they shout meshveret, meshveret, because it's not Kanun Islasi yet, they're thinking of an Islamic term. It is a Quranic meshveret, which will bring obviously a constitutional thing, but not a democracy as some claim.
Yes.
But okay, that's...
Thank you. Oh.
Yes.
You had mentioned that there were, the Softa had a lot of connections with people from different social and economic classes, and I'm wondering if there were, and you had like briefly talked about Aleppo, I'm wondering if there were other trans-regional like connections between like these protests or these events that were happening in other places outside of Islam.
Yeah, yes. It's a great question actually. It's you can see reflections of all these, you know, movements and the Softa's protests, the more active movement, political opposition, and their possible collaboration with, like the Hunchak or the committee for the Ottoman Union, and in different provinces in central Anatolia, especially in Konya, for instance, Kayseri, in Ankara. There is a fascinating PhD dissertation written in Konya Selçuk University, a Turkish author. So he focused on the origins of political protest against Abdülhamid II regime, especially corruption and the misadministration stuff in this Konya and Eskişehir as well, central Anatolia usually, and the role of Talebi, you know, ulum and also the ulema, the religious also scholars, their involvement. So, but it's, you know, the evidence or the literature is very, very, you know, scant in regards to that subject matter. Yeah.
Please, George.
Hi. I'm really fascinated by this name, Talebi Ulum.
Yes.
Ulum.
Talebi ulum.
Talebi ulum.
Yeah, science,
So
right?
it's Taliban, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The second part, Chris, can you spell that in the normal Romanized way? I can look it up. So the Talebi, and then what comes after?
Ulum. It's the plural of ilm. The sciences. They are the students of sciences.
Okay. And then, and then the obvious question, really super naive. So what is the thread of connection between these folks and the folks we know today? Are they like the original Taliban, more or less?
No, actually, it's not a naive question, by the way. It's a very historical question that makes a lot of sense to me. So they are entirely, distinctively different. Actually, I prefer to analyze the former one, the Softas, and I found them much more intellectual, let's say, and also politically more active. Not very pragmatic and strategically. Of course, they were pragmatic and strategically driven as well, but unlike, you know, the current one. So it's just that, but here we kind of try to dissect how this kind of religious, you know, this societal group created their own movement and made political alliances with other political organizations, which they were entirely dissimilar to each other. So it also shows actually the fragmentation, and also the how they could maneuver vis-a-vis the political developments for, you know, common purposes or against the common enemy, for instance, in the case of Abdülhamid II. So their politicization and how they became part of this politas society of the 19th century, Istanbul first and foremost, and how they were actually became a pivotal actor, one of the pivotal actors at least, you know, in this scheme, let's say.
Thank you, Emil. just to add a greater longue durée approach
Please.
to your examination of the student rebellions, this is not the first time in Ottoman history when we see the students rebelling. Back in the late 16th, early 17th century, several Ottoman provincial towns were shaken by a series of student rebellions that are called the Softa
Yes.
revolts. And I believe the Softa as a term is just a transformed version of the
Yes.
word Softa. I wonder you are interested in adding that kind of literature to your examination of the evolution of the term Softa as a word of abuse instead of,
Wonderful question. Yes, definitely. We are now working on it, and it was suggested by Eden Bey as well while we start doing this research. So we will definitely, go to that period and trace them back. The activities. I think linkages are really, really bigger than we would expect or surmise. Yeah, it's a very good point. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, my quick question is, I've been reading Oral Haig's teaching it for so long, and I think I retired it finally recently because it's
really?
in French and German, and it's a true Orientalist that you should know all the languages before you get there. But I really liked it in the sense that I don't see him using it as a sort of a negative, at all negative, and when I come to the conclusion, it's sort of like these are real believers. Like they really believe. They're upset with the corruption in the empire. He uses the cases of the judge giving a judgeship to his son, and they're not able to get that. So you really get a really positive feeling that they're believers, and that's. So my quick question is that, do they also play a huge role in March incident? This is what I remember from somewhere defending Abdülhamid II.
Maybe 31st of March.
Yeah.
1909.
And if this is the case, first of all, I think the idea that you have a huge new intellectual class that's emerged by the late 19th century that's competing with them in that sense. That's one thing. So are these really sort of modern religious young students that actually believe, many of them, they're believers in that sense, and they are a sense of a weather bell, which way the empire is going, and I think that if you look at it like a weather bell, you might understand why on one hand they're against Abdülhamid II, but then 20 years later they support him. Maybe that might sort of help. Or maybe that's what you're doing already.
Yeah, we are doing it. It's a very good question as well. Actually, the picture is really changing after the Iran Revolution. We have kind of encountered a different kind of structure among the Softas, ulemas as well, and because there were also Talebe Ulum students, let's say, and the ulema, and who were main proponents of the Young Turk Revolution as well. But after the revolution, the old political constellation have been changed. That also found a direct reflection among the Softas or the religious groups as well. So, the Mustafa Sabri Efendi kind of section, and then he was a supporter, and then changed his side, and so different political actors and then got involved. But still, we haven't found any evidence concerning the involvement of this Talebe Ulim students, or the period we are working in the supporter of Volkan, and then behind the 31st March incident. Still, it remains obscure to us. It begs for more research, more exploration, I guess.
I think Ararat had a question. Did you? Oh, no, okay. Ayşe Baltacoğlu.
Thank you. So I'm going to be another early modernist in general to tie to what Tunç mentioned. And I was actually thinking about the Softa ayaklanmalar, of course we know that, but I was thinking about when did Softa became Softa. And I need to check that, but I think Katip Çelebi is one of the earlier ones who used Softa Şekabeti when he was talking about what happened in the second half of the 16th century. So that may also give you an earlier point of that the terminology in terms of
Okay.
when Softa became Softa. And the other, this is just a comment.
So he used the shekafet, right?
Shekafet, Softa Shekafet.
Very good.
And the question that I have, when the state itself talking about the Softa isyanları in the late 16th or 17th century context, how historians have talked about and understood that these people, they basically were not able to find jobs. Job market became increasingly tight because the number of medreses increased, but there were not enough jobs created to correspond the increasing number of graduates from these schools. And they turn into means to actually basically find money and resources in whatever way they could. And then they basically looted places and attacked people and caravans, etc. In this context that you are talking about in the 19th century, has this ever mentioned where the Softas are getting involved in these issues and topics? Some of them are maybe ideologically involved, and some of them basically the issue of materialism is the issue of money.
Great question. Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of course, you know, in the classical sense of the word, they're very diverse kind of groups, but some of them were involved in this kind of pragmatic, strategic, and kind of economic sometimes interest. So they were really vestedly, I mean, when they had vested interest, and when these interests were at stake, some of them really act upon it. So therefore, we are not kind of attributing this sheer or ideal, pure oppositional elements to these forces against Abdülhamid II. So they had, I mean, very politicized groups in the first place, and they had different various interests, economic, social, political. I mean, running away from the military conscription, it was the classical argument, but also seeking for, because some were proponents of constitutionalism, Midhat Pasha, but of course not only in some ideal, pure kind of reasons. But again, we need kind of more, for instance, ego documents. We don't have any. So one of the memoirs of a Softa, professional Softa, let's say, would have been really great to see actually one day of a Softa even.
Dream on.
So, but yeah, that's absolutely, they were involved, just like Janissaries. That's why Murat Şivilioğlu really described them as the priestly Janissaries. Yeah.
Zeynep Ertuğrul.
I have a question about, I will reiterate the question that you asked in the beginning, or in the end also, in the end of the presentation, were these policemen dressed as Softa? What do we do about it? It's because it can be applied, I think, listening to hearing this thing also about the 31st March incident, were they really soft, like religious students or not, or were they really fanatics? Also like 99 Armenian massacres, they say, oh, they were like fanatics, they were not the CUP. So this possibility, what do you have on this?
We don't know.
But
We don't. Yeah, these are all, you know, question marks. And I asked this question to Ethem in the first place. So again, I didn't get
Because I should remember, or what?
So Ismail Kara is kind of, you know, the person who has an expertise on this subject matter, and I have very long interviews with Ismail Bey, and he told me that I never heard of such a thing, you know.
Which
So-
doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because, I mean, he has an agenda too. I mean, he's, you know.
Exactly, but again, as an Islamic intellectual, let's say, from this school of thought and this milieu, let's say, I never heard of it. But Armenian sources, some Armenian sources actually, some imply that, some blatantly say that, you know. So it also kind of, I mean, there is a political agenda behind the authors of the sources also, because to make such an argument, you could put Abdülhamid, you know, you could held Abdülhamid responsible for the massacres.
He was.
Yeah, he was. He was, but again, that was one of the supporting proofs behind it. But they were scenes like, you know, the Sarıklılar were beating like Armenian laborers, working, you know, class people, Bantuks, and according to these foreign reports and then local residents of these newspapers, they were policemen.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
just it was like in very, I'm putting it very simply, just hitting two birds with one stone for Abdülhamid II. On the one hand, you're suppressing a very concrete, you know, strong political opposition to your your rule, and the other hand, you were also dealing with the Armenian issue by putting all the blame on the soldiers of Softa.
I mean, one could push the analogy to include the Kemalist medreses, Milli Türk Talebe Birliği, for example, and the way in which they attacked the newspaper Tan,
Yes.
or 1955, the pogrom of 6 and 7. But I think this is, but it's dangerous in a sense, you know, I mean, obviously 16th, 17th, 18th century, the work by Robert Olson on Esnaf and the Janissaries in the rebellions of 1730 and whatever. There's so much there that looks continuous, but I think it's dangerous to establish a parallel. I mean, I like the idea of, you know, I mean, 76, 95, 1909, because you're talking about a generation and a half. It's still, you're talking about the same context. But 1826, I mean, the dynamics are so different,
yes.
and there are plenty of Yaftas around.
Yes.
And who is behind the Yafta? Of course, the Softa is a product of modernity. I mean, it's after there is talk of equality, of westernization, of progress, whatever, that suddenly you have a category of somebody who is distinct from this thing. So in a sense, they are a product of this change of times. It makes sense that it starts really with 1853 or with 1858, the plot against Abdülhamid. But still, I think we have to agree that Softa doesn't mean anything. I mean, that Talebi Ulum, when you look at these crowds, there's no possibility that all of them were medrese students.
Yes.
It's impossible. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So medrese students are a core which is probably much more vocal, intellectually capable and whatever, but you have a mass form of violence. Anybody with a sarık, with a turban, is labeled a Softa by everyone. I mean, on both sides.
Yeah.
That's what is really, so we don't know.
Yes.
We don't know until, as you hopefully suggest, we read the memoirs of a Softa.
I mean, this research has really concrete loopholes. So it requires. So, and also we have been dealing with 4.5 years. So this article was the product of 4 years, research. So probably it will take another 4 years to fill out these gaps, hopefully.
You're an optimist, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Question.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a very interesting topic. Just a more mundane question. You started with Sasun.
Yes.
Protest. Why Sasun? I mean, Sasun has been a scene of violence, I think, more than once in its history, in that period. Why Sasun? Why not Van, Bitlis, Ala?
Yes. So Sasun, first of all, it had a symbolic kind of meaning, but also in Istanbul there were so many migrant workers from these regions. So this Bantu, we call them the laborers, porters, most of them. So, and they were hearing all these news and the massacres from about their families and relatives, and also Sasun massacre. It took precedence than other massacres in Van and Bitlis. So it was it took place
why
before.
Why started in Sasun? Why started there in Sasun? What was special about it?
The massacres in okay. The massacres in Sasun, because Sasun first The Armenians in Sasun, they were armed. The Hunchakian political party was very strong in Sasun, and the Sasun people and under the leadership of Hunchakian, they were demanding for political reforms to be fulfilled by Abdülhamid II. So, and once these kind of demands and claims were unheeded by Abdülhamid II, they kind of protest, and they since they were armed, they were very politicized, and they went to the mountains and kind of revolt against the state. And in terms of centrality and the Sasun mountains for the state, it was kind of impreachable for the state. So, and the central kind of reforms were not able to reach out, the Sasun and in this mountainous region. So that's why the protests, revolt, and the political also protests against Abdülhamid, it was very vivid and vibrant then. So that's why Abdülhamid took it quite seriously.
It was the most successful resistance.
As well.
I mean, it was the only point where the Armenians were able to organize and hold on
resistance
against aggression.
Yeah.
So it had a symbolic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, if there are no, yes, please.
Yeah, regarding the Armenian massacres in the 1890s, I read in Robert Fisk's book, and Derek Princeton mentioned in a passing, the one which came out posthumously, that Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, censored the Armenian massacres in exchange for concessions from the Sultan Abdülhamid for Zionism. Do you have any more information on that?
I don't have any information.
Are you aware of that?
It doesn't sound improbable,
No,
but it's
Source.
it's interesting. I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, definitely take it.
I mean, the relationship between Zionism and the Armenian genocide has always been problematic.
But it doesn't sound unlikely to me. So.
Yeah, we'll be able to show you the book from Robert Fisk, because he quotes an article from Haaretz about Theodor Herzl censoring the Armenian genocide. And Derek Princeton's book, which came out in 2021 on Theodor Herzl biography.
Yeah, we are usually always very cautious about British reports and the British ambassador reports regarding the Armenian massacres, because it was like, okay, it was systematically organized. Abdülhamid was following every minute and everything, and it's it really overlooks so many dimensions of it. So that's why these kind of sources, we are all, kind of cautious about the veracity of the information in it.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk. I was curious about how Softa saw the Constitution and the first Parliament. Like, when they were opposing against the South Ottoman system, were they asking for the Constitution again, or the reopening of the Parliament?
Yeah. So, as I have mentioned in the presentation, so they were pro Midhat Pasha kind of followers, and they were also main supporters of the Constitution and the Parliament. Once both institutions were prorogued as a result of the Ottoman Russian War in 1877-78. So and when Abdülhamid was also dragging and very obstinate to not open it, so they were again agitated and protest against it. So they were, but not all Softas here. Some again, we kind of term them liberal-egalitarian kind of Softas. So, but not all of them for sure. Since we use it as Ethem just pointed out, the blanket term, that makes us think that all Softas were for the constitution or the parliament. But Midhat Pasha supporters, there were also anti-Midhat Pasha supporters among them. So it's just this politicization is really fascinating to me, actually. Yeah, having worked and conducted research on the collective violence, Armenian genocide, dispossession, and this kind of politicization of this group of people really fascinates me. So.
Yes. That will be the last question.
You put at the very beginning in the flyer that it says implications for the Middle East at large.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to. I get what I think. I get where you're coming from. But no, but I mean, I'm just interested that you put that in there, and that
Maybe we,
you mentioned it also in your talk, and then you.
It may sound very sweeping, but still, it needs more research and also exploration. So religion, this kind of research may change the contemporary understanding of this religion. Like all religious groups, they were fanatical, not progressive. They can be progressive elements among this, religious groups, or I mean, the political groups or political class, let's say. So that's why all these Cartesian dichotomies also, not sufficient, not enough to explore the real religious fabrics or the politicization of these different religious groups within the Middle East. And Ottoman Empire is a paragon example of this in that sense.
It comes at a really interesting time, like the last 10, 20 years of seeing, if we're reading about latest book and another book, Ur's book, and, Christians and Muslims working together in the rural areas often. This sort of kind of bondship between them. Now you're seeing it also with this.
Yes.
I just think I thought that would be your answer.
No, it has. What you're saying resonates with it also. It kind of invites us to revisit intercommunal dynamics in the late Ottoman Empire as well. Not only Christians or non-Muslims or Muslims, also Muslims among the Muslims as well. Exactly.
It might be interesting to look at comparisons with the Al-Azhar students in Cairo.
That would be fascinating.
Right?
Wow.
But then again,
yeah, that would be fascinating.
Another day. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Good night to all.
Good night.